Welcome to episode 154 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat and podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. As always, I'm your host, Chris Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, just a couple things to cover as always. If you haven't already, follow, subscribe, check us out on all platforms for the podcast. So you can find us, I believe, on 10 audio platforms. That's all the major ones like Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and a few other smaller ones as well. So you can check us out there. And if you're on Apple, rate 5 stars allows the podcast to grow a bit easier. And in regards to video, you can find us on YouTube at The Routecast. So you can find us on all platforms, whether audio, video, whatever you fancy. And last but not least, before we get into the podcast, follow us on social media if you want to see who's coming out that week in regards to, let's say, the magazine cover that we put out and a bit about them, and as well as podcast clips. So you can kind of maybe get a little bit of tidbits or a little insight into what that episode might be like. So check us out at The Routecast on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, as I mentioned, everything in between. So with that now said, let's get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Zoom. In the world of partnerships, there's a simple principle. You adapt or you die. In this fast-paced industry, you can't afford to miss a beat. And that's where Zoom will help you win each and every time. Zoom provides premier real-time data insights for partnerships across broadcast, streaming, and social like no one else. They're always ready, and detailed analytics help you get the upper hand and save time in your day-to-day reporting. So if you're ready to upgrade your reporting today, make the smart choice and choose Zoom. With that, today's guest. And I'd like to welcome someone that I had the opportunity to actually connect with when I was a student, and they have experience in entrepreneurship, sports business, and now consulting. The current Chief Operating Officer at I4C Consulting, Chris Atack. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. As the podcast name states, The Route. Do you mind maybe telling us where it began and how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, for sure. Well, my career probably started similar to many, right? You in an undergraduate degree, not really knowing where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and heard about this sports business management program, and that seemed like the perfect fit for me, marrying up sports and business. Two things that I was passionate about, and obviously sports more so as a fan at the time. And from a business perspective, I knew that was the direction I was going to take with my career, but not really sure where to start. Was it going to be sales? Was it going to be marketing? Got into the program. So it was the Algonquin Sports Business Management Program. I had done an undergraduate degree at Queen's and fell in love with that as an opportunity for me, marrying those two passions together. Internship with the Ottawa Senators. So that was back in 2002, 2003. And worked my way into a full-time role there. Survived a couple of lockouts in the NHL along the way, and became director of season seats and group sales as well. And then added another item to my portfolio along the way, became the director of local regional sponsorship and premium seating. And then I moved over to OSEG, the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, where I was director of ticketing, and then ended my time there as VP of business intelligence, digital marketing, and ticket sales as well, before coming over here to I4C into the consulting world. So interesting journey, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it as we go through here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about just asking that question, because I already have, let's say, maybe 5 that I'd like to get at. But I guess with that said, the way the format usually works is maybe we'll start at the beginning and then we'll work to where we are now. I guess going back to when you were younger, you're about to, go to a post-secondary education. Was there ever maybe a time where you're thinking about something else, right? Was there ever, I don't know, something like, I was talking to a buddy the other day, he said he thought about doing winemaking as a course, right? And sometimes I have friends that did film or communications, different things like that. Or was it always just, business?
Yeah, actually, when I started my time at Queen's, initially I thought filmmaking was a path for me. Documentaries specifically was what I wanted to do, and took a number of courses at Queen's in the film studies department. which is actually, ironically kind of helped from a marketing perspective as my career has evolved over the years. But for sure, that was a path that I thought quickly kind of came to terms with. I wasn't really willing to live the life of what I learned a filmmaker to be. Of course, it's not all the glitz and glam that maybe you see from the outside looking in, similar to the sports industry as well. So took a turn and focused on sports. But when I was making that decision around, do I go into the sports program or not? I also wrote my LSATs at that time and considered going into the law program and getting my degree there, which would have been more typical of my family members at that time.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Just kind of figuring it out, see what lands versus what doesn't. And it sounds like you had a lot of decisions to make, right? Where you're a
Yeah.
student. I know myself too. I started off in accounting, same thing where that's what my parents kind of typically did. And then I went to the marketing realm. Was there maybe so for myself, the way I knew I had to change, I got offered a job full time in accounting once I graduated, and I don't know why. As soon as that was offered, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I need to leave. Was there a point in time that happened to you? You're like, you know what, it's just not going to work out for me in film, or was it a gradual process?
I would say with film, it was probably more of a gradual process. But for law, I went and sat in on a couple of courtroom sessions with my uncle and realized that some of those cases can look pretty interesting, again, back inside of movies or things like that we would watch, but you get into the actual courtroom and you see how completely different it really is, and realize that wasn't really a journey that I wanted to go on.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And to be honest, my dad did something similar to me where he tried introducing me to lawyers, bankers, different things like that to see, hey, is there something that would interest you? Remember, I wanted to be a sports agent because I thought that's the only way to work in sports, either be a coach, a GM, or an agent. Speaking to a lawyer, and he's like, yeah, you probably won't make any money until you're 40, 50. You're going to work 20 hours coming out of school. And I was like, oh, and there's a lot of reading, which was the kicker for me. I was like, oh, I hate reading. But
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. And then as you kind of went on, was it that internship with the centers? Was that what really started it all, where you kind of maybe got a little insight into what the sports business space is like and maybe drove that passion a bit further?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was, as I said, a sports fan first and foremost, and the sports business management program, it was the first year of that program, so there wasn't really any history to say, well, what do these grads typically do when they're finished the program? So many of us entered that program in year one thinking we were going to be the next GM of the Senators or the Maple Leafs or the Toronto Raptors or whatever the case may be. And of course, you've got that dream of being on the actual sports side of the business if you're a fan. So I think the early learnings in that program, just kind of listening to guest speakers and so on, was that was going to be a really, really tough dream to fulfill. Obviously, we've got some examples since I would have been through that program, like Kyle Dubas with Toronto, now with the Penguins, that have made that career journey from kind of sports business management student to the hockey side. But I think, again, for most of us in that program, we realized early on, okay, well, we're going to start somewhere at the bottom level of a sports organization and have to work our way up. And you know what, as long as you're passionate about what you're doing, that's okay. And certainly for me with sports, that was the case. That first year with the Senators as an intern, being at all the games, representing the team at various events in the community, really getting ingrained as a member of the organization was just an awesome opportunity to get into something. And for me, felt like the right place, felt like home. I knew it was going to be a bit of a longer journey to achieve the type of financial result that I wanted for me in my career. And it certainly turned out to be the case. But the experience was really second to none.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a few things that are pretty interesting there. I guess going back to when you're initially sharing your route, you're talking about marketing versus sales, and then you're realizing it might be a longer journey than maybe initially expected, but it's fine because you can work your way up. How did you start off, right? Was it more so that was the role, the sales intern role, maybe what got you in, or was it more so, hey, let me just try this out, and you kind of continued on from there?
Yeah, the internship role was actually with the corporate sales department initially. And on day one, I arrived and I was given the yellow pages. You may be too young to even remember what those are, but I was given the yellow pages and I was told, hey, go through the yellow pages, focus on all the companies that have the larger ads, and then call them to see if they're interested in buying an ad in our game day magazine. And that was literally, the coaching that I got. So, classic internship, sort of off to an interesting or rocky start. But I had some experience. You mentioned in my intro, entrepreneur. So when I was in Queens doing my undergrad, I had a window cleaning business that I ran through the entirety of my time there. And then later on, started up a school for kids with autism as well with my ex-wife. Um, and so not afraid to pick up the phone, not afraid to make calls, and started to have some success with that, and closed a few deals, which led to other opportunities to start selling ticket packages and so on as a part of the internship. And eventually, I was doing well enough in my internship that they decided they were going to start to pay me part-time to sell ticket packages for them. So that really paved the way for me to get a full-time role coming out of my internship. And that was kind of the spirit that I approached it with, was if I could outwork everyone else there, then I could achieve my dream, which my first dream was really getting a job in the sports industry, but not just in the industry, with the Sens, my favorite team and the place that I wanted to be.
Yeah, no, that's great, and love the sense too. It's just making me go through it a bit right now, especially with last night's game. But I guess on that note as well, you're talking about maybe at your time as Queens, right? Kind of maybe with a window cleaning business. And I know from speaking to different people, they're saying a lot of the time when they're looking for their, you know, initial sales representatives to work at their business, when someone has window cleaning or those painting student businesses, those candidates always kind of stand out to them. Do you mind maybe touching on that? Because I think that maybe has an impact on people in their sales journey later on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, those jobs, those businesses, really rely on you getting out, you and a team perhaps getting out. In my case, at the time, going door to door, selling window cleaning to neighborhoods, and if you get a couple of deals in a specific neighborhood, then you could reference that to the neighbors. And then once you kind of, especially in newer neighborhoods, when you can figure out sort of the general cost of doing windows inside and outside, or just the outside for that neighborhood, typical size of house, you could then go to a flyer blitz program. Now you maybe do digital ads, but back in the day, more of a direct mail approach to trying to generate leads for yourself. So, for me, I had worked in restaurants and so on during high school, but hadn't done anything like that before. I had a fear of heights as well that I had to overcome, getting ladders to do jobs. But I think you really get through dealing with some of the issues that typically people have early on in their sales career, which is dealing with objection, that fear of even pitching something. That became really easy to do. Lots of doors slammed in my face, but also lots of great conversations as well, and built the business pretty considerably over that time frame.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it's like, especially door to door sales, right? It's, coming to someone's home and asking them and taking some of their time away. What was that like? Because I'm sure that then probably helped you with selling tickets or even corporate partnerships, those rejections and even that initial stage of pitching. Because I'm sure maybe a lot of times the people that are listening, maybe they're a university age and they're kind of maybe starting their career as well. What are kind of some of those things that you learned through those rejections, those initial pitches that allowed you to move on from there?
Yeah, I think, I learned from start to finish probably just the better way to position the product. And ultimately it was, about the value. We weren't charging a lot of money. I think our average job might have been $75. But we were taking away a job that took a couple of hours for a homeowner. And, it can be a little dangerous at times on ladders and climbing on rooftops and so on. We also cleaned their eaves troughs if they wanted us to do that too. So dirty work, sometimes dangerous work. We took that away. So that's kind of where I started to focus the pitch was, let's just take away this shitty job for you. And we started having more success that way. And then I think too, from an efficiency perspective, more from the business owner, business manager side of things, when we were able to kind of get to a general quote versus quoting every single job, we could pick up a number of more opportunities that way, just because we weren't taking so much time in the quote process or the sales process, and just presenting people with a really good value proposition for taking away a pain point for them.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And as you're mentioning, there may be sometimes dangers as well, and your fear of heights too. Did you ever have any maybe mishaps or ever like close
Yeah.
scenarios where you're like, I'm not doing this anymore?
Yep. There was one scenario. I was about 20 feet up on a ladder, and it was the morning, so there's a little dew on the deck down below. And to keep things cost effective, it's not like you have anybody holding the ladder at the bottom. So I have the ladder placed up against this window that are against the siding, and I'm cleaning the window, and all of a sudden I could feel the ladder start to slide, and I'm going down with it, and watching every kind of piece of siding on my way down, and then the window at the bottom, and then crashed right into a patio table, luckily, because that broke my fall. Had to replace that patio table, so it turned out to be an expensive job, but got away with that one.
Wow, that's crazy. Like I've seen videos like that, right? Just when you're going online, you see some things like that, and the impact, right? Just from the ladder and you landing on it,
Yeah.
it's crazy too that you then have to replace the table. Not that hey, thank God you're alive, but more so hey, we need a new table. But
Yeah.
man, that's brutal. And I guess continuing on from there, you're touching on your time, breaking to the sports industry, getting in with the Senators. Do you mind maybe getting into that a bit further? What were those initial experiences like? How were you maybe gaining some steam and able to kind of advance from there? And I'll just let you go with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, back in 2003, 2004, that season would have been my first season selling full time for the Senators. So by this point, I had graduated the sports business management program. There was no real BI team or any approach to segmentation. So every customer was the same. The only thing you could really segment was kind of value or potential value. So we looked at kind of the business community is obviously one subset of potential customer for us. And then there was Joe fans, so people who had bought tickets to see games in the previous season or during that 03-04 season, or maybe former season ticket holders that we were trying to win back. Again, similar philosophy to what I talked about during my internship, where for me, it was about maximizing my effort. I didn't have any kids or anything at the time, so I had the ability to spend longer hours. So we worked, typically about 12 hours a day. I always had a goal for myself of 150 outbound dials. Doesn't mean that I talked to 150 different people, but typically left a lot of voicemails. 60-70% of the time, I think we'd be leaving voicemails and getting very little return. But really trying to either book meetings if it was a business opportunity and or get to the point with consumers and try to create an opportunity with them. Through that, I was able to become the number one sales rep on the team, which helped me take a next step. Unfortunately, the next season was the lockout, the first lockout in the NHL, the full year lockout in 04-05. But put me into a really good position going into the lockout, which allowed me actually to keep my job during the lockout, unlike a lot of my colleagues, unfortunately, at that time, and then come out of that lockout as a manager of inside sales. So I didn't last long as an individual sales rep because I kind of worked my way into the opportunity to manage and coach other people.
Yeah, and just kind of maybe building on, there's two things that kind of stuck out to me there. One of them was just, the 12 hours, 150 dials a day. And also just kind of maybe comparing it from what sales like is today compared to what it was back then. So maybe to start, just kind of going back, I know you're mentioning, you referred to your internship where you're kind of going through yellow pages, or even how, there wasn't many customer segments. It's more so, regular Joe versus maybe a business customer. Do you find maybe all the different tools that we have now to maybe segment a bit more specifically, or even just break it down a bit further? Do you find it's more advantageous, or more so it's just putting that effort and getting those calls in?
I think you can still win today without that level of sophistication, but certainly puts you into a much better position to be successful, both as an individual sales rep, but also as an organization if you have a segmented strategy to marketing and communicating towards your various different customer groups and audiences. But again, back in those days, you didn't have that, or at least it wasn't really something that organizations invested a lot of time in. One of the key differences, I think, is, in 2003, 2004, pick a year in that time frame, you definitely got a lot of voicemails, but you had a lot more success connecting with people on the phone than you do today. Whereas today, there's just so many ways in which people can be communicated with. And of course, all those channels are full of, email messages, LinkedIn messages, you name it, voicemails, text messages that, from people that are trying to sell to you or build a relationship with you, you tend to tune out. So it's much harder to get through to someone today than it was then. So making 150 calls, even if I was leaving 60, 70% of those being voicemails, occasionally did get callbacks. But I was getting through with 30 or 40% of my effort on the phone, which meant that, I was getting a bunch of no's, but I was also creating meetings and creating opportunities with the targets. So then it became more of a numbers game, right? As long as I stuck with that 150, it became a bit of a formula for success.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And even just you kind of maybe comparing it now. I remember when I was a kid, we'd come home, we'd have the home phone in the kitchen, and there'd be the red light going, and you'd always check that. That was the first thing you did when you got home. But now, with the iPhone, I have all these different red indicators telling me, hey, I got to answer this person or that person here, there. So sometimes it go a few days or don't even answer them sometimes. So that definitely makes sense. And I guess going back to your, 150 calls a day, right? And then how you're able to kind of keep your job and you maybe get promoted through the lockout. Do you find what really stood out was, let's say, the effort and the efficiency you were able to come out of it? I know you're saying sometimes it would just go to voicemail, but you still kind of got into the flow of, hey, maybe 30, 40% of the people would answer you and got to go from there? Or is there something else that you learned that was also a key element to make you successful and able to kind of develop throughout your career?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things, right? Because you can be an extremely hard worker, but alienate yourself from the rest of the group, whether that's the team that you're working with, in my case, the sales team, or the rest of the organization. You have to find a bit of balance, right? There's going to be a hard worker, but do it with passion and build relationships, connect with people outside of your sphere. And I think, for me, if I could do anything over again, I probably would have done an even better job, I think, at that latter part, because I was so focused on, hitting my numbers every day and worried about what was within my direct control. But I think, the relationship that I built with at least my direct superiors and some of those in the marketing department as well, allowed me to showcase my skills, my passion, the thought I had for how we could build together as a team, sales and marketing going forward in the future, new product ideas, just things that I was coming to the table with, I think, just outside of the day-to-day that I was tasked with doing. So I think that's really important, regardless of what you do inside of a company, is to really immerse yourself in that company and to think outside of your lane. Some companies want you to stay in your lane, of course, and you need to, like, you have to do what you're paid to do. But if you can add value outside of that lane, and the company's receptive to that, then I think that's a part of that key ingredient for success. And it was for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice. And I guess building on that too, previously you touched on the learning center that you developed with your ex-wife. What was that like to, be working full time with the centers, but then also maybe developing a business on the side? How are you able to kind of maybe manage both things while also still, advancing yourself in your career full time?
Yeah, it was. There was times where it was challenging for sure, both from a relationship perspective. Part of why I guess we're no longer actual husband and wife. But we also had business partners at the time. So kind of collectively, there was a group of four of us that put the plan in place, executed on that plan. Got to the point where we had two centers here in Ottawa, one in Kingston and one in Whitby. And most importantly, I think for that business was because it's serving a real need in the community, helping families and kids with autism, is we were doing that, right, and we were making these resources available to families and in areas that otherwise it didn't exist, or there wasn't enough capacity to serve all the needs in the community. And for us, it was never really about becoming super successful or wealthy. It was something that, number one, my family is passionate about. I have a cousin who has autism. Part of how my ex-wife and I got involved in the space to begin with. And I think giving an opportunity as well for my wife at the time, my ex-wife now, to spread her wings a little bit and take models that had been done in other markets and apply it here in Ottawa to begin with. So it was an interesting journey. And as I said, certainly at times it was a lot to handle with a full-time job.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess maybe one of my last questions on that topic was there ever maybe any issues with your employer, right? The senders at the time, where they're like, hey, it's great that you're doing something good for the community, but if you have time to do this, maybe you have more time to put in at work, right? Did you ever face some of those issues, or was it more so you did a good job balancing yourself in regards to?
Yeah, like for me, the senators came first in terms of my responsibilities with the learning center. So my time was more so in the evenings or weekends that I would spend on it. Just meant I had less time to do anything for myself. And I think went through the front door with the SENS leadership at the time, telling them that I was doing this as a side business venture, and describing sort of where it was going to impact me, again, evenings and weekends more so than during the day or even game days where I needed to be senators first.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Just being open and transparent, going on from there. And I guess now going back to your time with the senders, how are you able to continue on? Obviously, you touched on becoming manager of sales, and obviously from there you went to director. What was that evolution like? Was it more so, hey, you just did a great job at your role and they saw that and promoted you, or was it the position became available, they asked you to apply, and you're kind of competing against people from, other roles internally, externally? What was that process like, moving within the senators?
Yeah, slow. If you consider that, it was 02, 03, I was an intern, and then 05, 06, and really only because there was a lockout in there, my career was progressing relatively quickly from intern to manager. And we had a lot of success. We were very fortunate to have a great hockey team at the time. And, we had the 03 conference final, then the 2007 Stanley Cup final. So coming out of that lockout in 05, we built this team kind of together, almost like family. In fact, I work here at I4C with one of those team members that went on that Stanley Cup run with me and the rest of the group in 2007. And, I say Stanley Cup run. I mean, obviously we were not on the ice. We were selling tickets and leveraging that success, and, hit some historical highs for the Senators that still stand today in terms of number of season ticket holders, the amount of new sales, renewal rate percentages, some of those key kind of KPIs in the ticketing world that, we're proud to have achieved, and also that they still stand today, despite some ups and downs, but some good ups along the way since my time there as well. So yeah, progressing to director, it wasn't necessarily like there was a posted job. I had to balance the desire to continue to evolve with the reality of what the organization was. And it's a smaller group, right? There's about 175 full-time employees with the Senators, and that includes the Bell Sensplex piece of the business as well. So there's not plenty of opportunity for upward movement, and kind of like the government, it's one of those places that if you get into the Sens or an NHL team type environment, and there's not a lot of options in Canada for that, you tend to want to stay. And so, I waited it out, I guess, from the time I got promoted as a manager and continued to get more responsibility added. And, I had a couple of good people like Jim Orban and Mark Bono, two people that I reported to at the time that were very supportive of me and gave me opportunities to take on things that kind of superseded my role as manager and were more director level type opportunities. But back in 2013, there was a change made, and a new executive vice president of ticketing came in. And I knew that meant that I was dancing for my dinner. And I was either going to have an opportunity to perhaps move upward underneath him or get fired. And I remember the initial conversation with him. I don't think it went very well because I could tell this is kind of leaning towards getting fired. And he said as much in our second meeting. But by the third meeting, he told me he was promoting me to director, and did I want to choose director of new ticket sales or director of season seat memberships and group ticket sales? And I chose the latter and got promoted towards the end of 2013.
I'm sure that's quite the conversation to be had, right? Where you're, meeting your new boss and they're like, "Hey, you're either gonna get promoted or you're gonna get fired," and there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess going back to what you were initially mentioning there in that answer, you were discussing how, earlier on in your career, kind of progressing quickly, right? Intern, then to moving up to manager in short order. And then you had, let's say, a period where you said slow, right? Where kind of maybe took some time to kind of continue to develop from there. So I had some chats with some people recently, and I feel like that's an issue a lot of people maybe have to overcome, where maybe the start of their career is slow in regards to getting promoted, or maybe they get promoted quickly and then they're kind of a lull and they're waiting for that next, promotion again, right? Because to
Yeah.
start their career, it's been every 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and then been moving up quickly. How do you deal with that? I know you mentioned you're with the center, so it's kind of, hey, you either stay here or you don't, and it's a unique role. But was there something maybe even personally, like, hey, like, I'd love to move up. I think I'm ready to move up. How are you able to deal with that beyond just being underneath an NHL team?
Yeah, I think, you have to advocate for yourself. Obviously, you need others in the organization to advocate for you to make that upward shift as well. I think in that environment, it wasn't going to happen because there was no opportunity. And yeah, of course, they can always create opportunities to keep people on board, but that really wasn't the culture of the organization at that time. For most people, if I look in the sports world, there would be people that were managers when I was a manager, and they work south of the border. Obviously, plenty more opportunities from a pro sports perspective, but even NCAA is a pretty big deal down there relative to CIS sports up here in Canada. So they would tend to bounce from team to team to team, right? And so manager to director, director to VP, and so on. And so their career path, went on a completely different ride than mine did, and certainly I was jealous of that at the time, But here, if you want to be in Ottawa, you only have a couple of choices from a pro sports perspective, and obviously you have one that's kind of major pro sports with the Senators. I was married to not only my ex-wife at the time, but the market here. It's where I wanted to be. The team was who I wanted to be with. So I was willing to sacrifice, I guess, the opportunity from a career perspective to wait for my time. And ultimately it paid off. I don't know that I would advise another person to do the same thing, because you do leave things on the table, right? You have your prime earning years, your prime learning years. And if you're not getting challenged, you tend to get bitter. And I think for me, there were times where I was on the wrong side of that, and needed to remind myself that I was there for a reason, and to be patient. And I'm not very patient by nature, but certainly that was something where it was tested for sure.
Yeah, and I guess maybe touching on that, right? You're saying if you were to speak to someone today, maybe you wouldn't advise the same thing. What would
Nice.
you advise? Would you say, hey, go find those new challenges, take on those new opportunities to develop? Or like how would you manage that if you were to speak to someone today?
Yeah, like I think honestly, and the employer-employee relationship is a two-way relationship. So if you're giving everything you can to an organization as an employee, then it's incumbent on the organization to give you opportunities to continue to learn and to continue to feel challenged and so on. If you don't feel that anymore, you're not getting that in return. So long as you're giving that organization what you've committed to or what you're capable of, then it's time to go and look for something else. And so in the sports industry again, or there's other examples of industries where they're kind of niche and there's not a lot of opportunity. You have to make that decision of, am I content with what I have, or am I going to make a change? Do I need to make a change? In other industries, if I look at like a marketing role, right? A marketing or a sales role. If you don't really care what you're selling or what you're marketing, then don't hang around and wait for the opportunity. If it's not coming for you, go out and find the next best thing and continue to grow your career. Again, find yourself in better positions. Alternatives aren't always better. So you have to do your due diligence and understanding, if you're going to take a different path, is that path actually better? Is it title driven? Is it financially driven? You find yourself into the next best situation and grow your career if you can.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And even just looking at it from, let's say, the sports angle or even just the other industries, obviously sports in Canada is a little bit different than sports in the States, as you were mentioning, right? Just so much fewer opportunities, even just being in Ottawa too. And like you're saying too, if you're in sales or marketing, just seeking those opportunities and areas to grow. And then building on that too, right? You're at the centers for really 15 or so years, and you moved on to OSEG where they have the Red Blacks and 67s. What was that progression like? Was that one a job posting? Was that one a referral? Was that one maybe a colleague or connection that you developed at the Senators? How did that progression come about? And I'm sure that would be a hard change to make, right? Going from, the Senators to another organization where you spent so much time at.
Yeah, it was a bit of a journey there too. So by then, I guess it was 2018 when I left the Senators. So I've been a director since 2013. Once again, I was ready, for upward opportunity. Unfortunately, the CMO at the time, who I reported to, had been let go by the organization. But it did create an opportunity. And so there was a VP of ticketing opportunity available at the time. It had been committed to me by a previous owner. And then that commitment was not honored. So I decided I was going to start to look at alternative options. And some of those options were leaving sports, which I, of course, have now. But back then, going through kind of the struggle of, I'm not ready to. I haven't completed everything that I wanted to do in the sports industry. And so evaluating other options. So OSEG, again, being the only other option in Ottawa, really, to continue, or at least at that time, to continue my sports career. I started reaching out to a couple of people who I knew in the organization. Got referred by Cyril Leader, who was the president at the time with the Senators. Had also got let go, but is now back as president of the Senators. He had referred me to the president of OSEG for an interview, and then was able to actually get the director role following that interview and an interview with their VP of ticket sales and marketing. So that opened the door to that world. It's funny because it was kind of full circle for me in my sports life. I started going to games when I was about 2 years old or so with my dad, watching the CFL team, the Rough Riders at the time, at Lansdowne, where they still play today. And so getting to go back there, being a part of that environment was nice to kind of cap, I guess, my sports career, at least at this point, and have that journey with OSEG.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Just that full circle moment, kind of, being able to work for a team that you went to growing up too. So I'm sure that was a pretty cool experience. And I guess during your time at OSEG, a little bit different, right, from the Senators, different, NHL to CFL and junior hockey. What was that experience like in regards to maybe facing different challenges that you maybe don't face at the Senators, but also maybe new opportunities as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the subject matter is the same, right? The challenge is the same. In some cases, the challenge is much greater. We had at the time 3 teams that we were selling for: the OHL team, the 67s. We had a USL team, the Fury, and then of course the CFL team, the Red Blacks. And the Red Blacks at the time, had been really successful, 3 Grey Cups in 5 years, or I guess we were about to go to our 3rd Grey Cup in 5 years in that 2018 season. Had won a Grey Cup, so first championship in Ottawa, and God knows how long, my entire lifetime. And soccer, the soccer team was, not that attractive from a marketing and fan perspective. So very small audience. 67s had some great years historically, selling out the arena there many times over, but had fallen on hard times. I think before coming back to TD Place, to Lansdowne to play, they had a couple of years where they were away from the arena, and they're playing actually out at Canadian Tire Center while the renovation of the stadium was going on, and a lot of their fans were from that core area around the arena or from the east end of Ottawa, and had just fallen off. So that was almost a complete rebuild challenge there. So if I look back in 2018, I had a really good year from a Red Blacks perspective. We hit our numbers. Again, the team went to the Grey Cup, so the team made it easy. They played well. That experience that the OSEG and the Red Blacks have become known for was really something cool to be a part of, right? Full stadiums, everybody kind of either partying, which there's at least half the crowd that's there for that, or the other half, there for the football and enjoying it. Soccer and hockey, again, a little bit more of a challenge. And so OSEG laid out big challenges for us there too, in terms of goals and opportunities. And we were able to, I think, almost double the 67s business year over year in my first year there. And again, you're dealing with a lot of hockey fans in the Ottawa market, but not as many hockey fans who really care about junior hockey the way they care about the Senators. So we had to come up with some creative strategies. And that was a group of people coming up with creative strategies and messaging, and then ultimately segmentation and our approach to how we did that over the years to build up that base of customers. On the soccer side, we did well. We did not do as well as football and hockey, but we made gains in that business year over year for the 2 years that we had the team. And then unfortunately, soccer politics got in the way of OSEG owning a team in 2019.
Yeah, I actually remember those times quite well. I was actually working as I don't know what it'd be called. I was working in the parking just at the TD place. So I was there for a lot of those games, so seeing a lot of the progressions of the different teams. Where I think maybe when I started, not too busy for some things, and then as time went on, I think near the end of the Fury, it was starting to get a bit busier too, where we had to have more people working. So it was kind of cool to kind of see that from a different perspective. One of the things you touched on there as well, maybe a bit earlier, was how it was a great way to cap your sports career. Did you have maybe foresight going to OSEG that, hey, maybe this is an opportunity that I'll take, and from then on I'd like to explore different industries or even consulting like you're in now? Or was it just an opportunity arose and you're like, hey, time to take that on?
Yeah, for sure. If I go back to that evaluation of perhaps leaving the Senators back in 2018, as I said, I did spend quite a bit of time looking at alternatives outside of the sports industry, and ultimately decided I wasn't ready and took the role with OSEG. But I knew going into that, it's of course always possible, and it still is today, that I could find myself another sports opportunity down the road, but it was likely going to be my last kick at the can in sports. Maybe in my career if I had stayed there for the rest of my career, but certainly I didn't think that was realistic. So, I thought in my head, give it kind of 3 to 5 years and see where it goes. Unfortunately, I would say my time with OSEG was during the pandemic. So we had the first year, 2018, 2019, which again, as I said, was a good year. And then we go into 2019-20, and our hockey team, the 67s, were on a path to be Memorial Cup champions, or certainly get to the Memorial Cup and be OHL champions in that season. And of course, like the rest of the sporting world, everything kind of shut down in 2020. So that, the experience during the pandemic, I think, really sucked a lot of the life out of it for me. And coming back to business in 2021, to a certain extent, we had limitations still on fans at games and so on. And then in 2022, same thing. It just didn't feel right anymore. And, for me, I was looking for another opportunity, a new challenge, something new to learn. How could I take, what I had learned in the sports industry and apply it somewhere else, which ultimately led to this opportunity that I'm in now in consulting.
Yeah, that's kind of cool just to kind of hear about, right? Where I'm sure it's quite the change. Obviously, completely different careers where I'm more at the beginning of mine than yours. But I'm also exploring, leaving sports. But then one thing that kind of holds me back is, I've developed a pretty good network. But then you're like, am I leaving that behind? And all the different things. Or there may be other challenges you're faced, or you're like, you know what, it's the right time to leave sports. I'm ready to embark on a new challenge, a new opportunity. And maybe how did this role come about? I know you mentioned you had a colleague that was working there from the Sens.
Yeah, well, actually, go back to my internship year with the Senators. One of the accounts that I inherited at that time was I4C Consulting, and I4C had season tickets, and they had some signage in the building at Canadian Tire Center. So developed a relationship with the owner at that time, and over the years, he tried to hire me 5 or 6 times to come over here and sell for him, or be a part of the team selling and acquiring business here at I4C. We have offices here, our corporate offices here in Ottawa, and then we have offices in Toronto and Montreal as well. My answer was always no. I didn't have any interest in being an employee in a consulting company, when I was focused on building my sports business career. But he approached me last fall and said, okay, look, I'm looking to back away running the day-to-day operations, and I'd love you to come over, but, I have a good offer for you. I said, well, what's the good offer? I'd like you to come in as my partner. Okay, well, that's a little different. That sounds a little bit more meaningful to me than another salaried position as an employee somewhere. So I was able to join again with a former colleague from the Senators as well, who was already in the consulting space. He and I joined together at the same time, both as partners with the original founder here of I4C. And it's been a really interesting first year on the job. And again, the first 3 months, probably a lot of learning, but the amount that I've applied from my 20 plus years in sports into this world, and some of the relationships we've built with not-for-profits, with private sector companies, and to a certain extent in the public sector as well, has actually surprised me. I think, really prepared me well, my sports career did, for this, because at the end of the day, sports business is business. It's not all fun and games as we get to enjoy as fans. There's a lot of strategy, a lot of planning, a lot of tactical execution. In my case, early in my career, as we've touched on today, a lot of phone calls too. But a lot of the principles of success in the sports world or entertainment world can be applied outside of that industry. So definitely prepared me well. And as I said, I've really enjoyed the challenge of my first year here in consulting.
Yeah, no, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. And I guess before we begin to wrap up the podcast, you might maybe sharing what that role entails, what you kind of do in the day-to-day, and we can kind of go on from there.
For sure. Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. So as I mentioned, private sector, public sector, our business is about 50-50. So in the public sector, most of the work we do is project-based work, fulfilling the needs of various government departments, whether that be federal, municipal, or provincial. We bring consultants. We have about 200 consultants that are active for us today on various contracts. So we're bringing talent that has very specialized skill sets to help solve some of the challenges or problems In the government, it's a lot of modernization of IT, business process work, change management, things like that. In the private sector, it's a wider array. So it could be things like building websites. So we have kind of a whole marketing practice on that side, a lot of business solutions. We're building applications for mobile as well as for web. We're working with not-for-profits around segmentation projects. So again, very similar to what I would have done in the marketing ticketing realm, helping them understand their donors better. Same thing at the university level with alumni. Very similar approach to what a not-for-profit would do around donations and engaging those donors or those alumni to remain consistent with them and supportive of them going forward. We're doing so many different things. It's hard to wrap up in a very short sentence, or description. But a wide array of projects covering essentially all facets of an organization. Wherever there's challenges, essentially we're bringing people to help solve them.
Yeah, no, it sounds very exciting, and I'm sure it's quite the change, but I'm sure it's a great new opportunity that you're in now. And the way I like to end the podcast, obviously we went through your whole route so far to date, and it's been really cool to kind of see the different changes and evolutions you've had so far. So since we went through everything, I'd like to maybe take a time to look back, right? So I've done this for this is episode 154. I've said it probably 154 times now. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair, thinking about all the different things I've been able to do so far. Let's say you're in the same position. So another Chris in another rocking chair. You're 103. You're thinking about all the things you've done in your career so far. What's maybe one story that's going to stand out to you where you're going to be 103, you're going to remember it, and you're going to be like, wow, what a cool moment that I got to do as a job, as a career that I can't believe happened.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be hard to pick one. Again, one of the benefits of being in the sports industry is there's so many of those. I can think of like 10 off the top of my head right now, but I think the general theme for me, and it is very unique perhaps to the sports environment or the sales environment, and certainly both of those things merge together. You typically have a lot of athletes or highly competitive people that are drawn to sales or marketing in the sports world. So, I think, again, the theme for me was sort of that bond, that team bond that we had in the moments that, were shared with my teammates over the years. And of course, those teams changed over time, right? As people kind of cycle through, typically every 2 or 3 years, you have a team changeover. But those moments that we had, celebrating wins, going to the Stanley Cup final with the Sens in 2007, and despite losing in Anaheim in Game 5, still quite an experience taking a charter trip with all of your colleagues to watch a Stanley Cup final game with your team playing. That was pretty profound. Things like if you're a Senators fan, you'd remember the Hamburglar run that we had, I think, in 2015, which that was just an amazing time, as the sales team was going through season ticket renewals, and at the same time you're trying to sell playoff tickets. And I think our chances of making the playoffs were below 1% going into the start of that renewal campaign in February. And then they rhymed off like a 22, I forget the record, like 22, 1-2 or something like that run to make the playoffs. And people had been, laughing at the sales team. Oh, we're not going to make the playoffs. I don't want my playoff tickets. And then, a week or so before the playoffs, it's looking like the Sens might make it. They're all scrambling, to call us and get their tickets renewed and get their playoff tickets, booked and so on. And it was maybe the one time in my entire career where we weren't chasing, they were chasing us. But yeah, again, those moments of kind of bonding with the team and those memories that, the guys or the guys and girls, the team we will share together, I think for the rest of our lives, for me, will be the memory that if I make it to 100 and what did you say, 103, 104 on a rocking chair, then I'll remember those for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to be honest, I think one of the biggest things after 150 plus episodes, it always ends up being like the people you spend the time with and those relationships you build. So it makes a lot of sense. And I remember the hamburger run. That was pretty crazy, and hopefully we have some of those good times coming soon in the future.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. And the last question I kind of have to wrap up every podcast is, we went into the future, 103-year-old Chris on a rocking chair. Let's go back to when you're 16, 17, 18, that time where you're starting to think about what you're going to do next after high school, right? So for you, is going to post-secondary education. What maybe one piece of advice that you've now learned that you can kind of go back in time, with a time machine, you can chat with a younger version of yourself. What's one thing you'd share that, like, hey, this is something I learned throughout my career so far. You should know this because it's going to be, a key element for your success.
Yeah, I think it's really working on soft skills more than anything. So if if you're not an extrovert, you have, more of a challenge forming relationships or like breaking out of kind of that comfort zone. You really got to practice that early. That's ultimately what's going to dictate, along again with at least a reasonable amount of effort and intelligence and so on. If you got the soft skills, you're going to do a lot better. For me, that would have been something that I think I would have benefited probably from practicing earlier on. That, and I would also say from an educational selection point of view, like pick something, like a business program or whatever, that no matter where you end up, 4 years later, when you're finished your degree, that's going to have value to you versus something that maybe is more specialized that you think you want to do early on. I'll use film as an example of that, right? I liked it, but I was like 18 years old and I liked movies, like that seemed like a lot of fun. That's not really a great decision from a school perspective, unless you really intend on following it through and being that filmmaker, in my case, making documentaries. So, I think soft skills are really critical. But also, as you're kind of coming to the end of your high school years, just pick a program that's going to lead you to something and give you options at the end of it.
Yeah, and that's why I like ending with that question, because I think that's some amazing advice. Where, like, even going back to accounting, obviously that's not what I ended up doing, but just even some of the Excel skills where I had working in accounting for a year and I'd get bored and I try all these different formulas. I still use it in marketing and sales now, so it's pretty cool to look back at that. And even just what you're saying in regards to developing those soft skills. I think when we first met, I was a student. I was initially in accounting, so I was like, oh, I don't need to network. Everyone needs an accountant. And then when I switched over to marketing, I was like, oh wow, like I'm way behind. Didn't have a LinkedIn. I think everyone in my class had 500 plus. They had the little plus on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, I got to do some catching up. And I remember I went to my first networking event. My dad told me, he's like, just go up to the first person you can and break the ice. And I think maybe where we met at that networking event was probably that one of the first few times I started doing that. And I think it's really helped me since. So I think that's some great advice. But yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, I really want to thank you for coming on. And I think it's been great hearing your story.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, and good to connect with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it for episode 154, and we'll see everyone next episode. Thank you.